Hi there, it's Matt here, and welcome back to the show, and a warm welcome back to a previous guest on the show, and that is Dr. Wendy Troxel. She is back by popular demand. Now, Dr. Troxel, Wendy, she is a senior behavioral and social scientist at the Rand Corporation, and she is also adjunct professor in psychiatry at the University of Pittsburgh and the Department of Family and Preventative Medicine at the University of Utah. Her research, gosh, I reference it so much. It's wonderful. Her research focuses on the interface between sleep, the social environment, health, relationships, sleep and sex, and also just the impact of sleep on society and also public policy. She is a leading authority on sleep in the context of close relationships, a topic that she's going to explore both in this podcast, but also that she explores in great detail in a superb book that she's published, which you can find on Amazon and all other great bookstores, called Sharing the Covers, Every Couple's Guide to Better Sleep. And the book, it's wonderful. It really reflects her deep understanding as to how sleep affects and is affected by our closest relationships. And this has come by way of 20 years of being a licensed clinical psychologist and a specialized researcher in sleep medicine. She's got an extensive research program. She's led multiple projects from the National Institutes of Health, the Department of Defense, private foundations, corporations. She's got over 150 peer-reviewed papers. Her TED Talk, just go online, Google Wendy Troxel, that's Troxel, Troxel, Wendy Troxel TED Talk. It's such a great talk, and it has some wonderful key points as to how to discuss things that we need to change in society regarding policy. For example, school start times, how to improve adolescent mental and physical health. Wendy is driven by a commitment, the same commitment I have, to make a tangible difference to people's lives by way of providing evidence-based strategies to support human health. She's wonderful. It is my privilege and delight to welcome Wendy Troxel to the show. Wendy, welcome back to the show for a second time. Audience demand, popularity. Here you are again. Thank you for returning to the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure.
So I want to return to our initial conversation, our first episode, and we were speaking a lot about the consequences of sleep disruption on a couple's relationship. In terms of sleep and mental health, are there any preventative measures that couples can take to mitigate the adverse effects of a lack of sleep? So let's just assume that for whatever reason, sleep is going to be challenging. Maybe it's children, newborns, maybe it's children who are sick. Maybe it's because someone themselves is sick. For whatever reason, there's sleep disruption in the context of a couple. Are there any preventative strategies that you often advise in the likely or expected circumstance of that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, you and I are both in a position where we like to, preach the gospel of sleep and emphasize how critically important it is for people to get the sleep that we know they need. And yet, the reality is there are times in people's lives when sleep is just going to be difficult. You've named several, after having children, especially when they're infants, we know that sleep disruption is just part and parcel of the experience. Certain job demands, just certain times of your life might be characterized by sleep disturbance or insufficient sleep. So what do couples do, and how do you navigate that to avoid these cascading negative effects that can lead to the truly toxic relationship behaviors that I discussed? Well, I mean, I think that there's several things that couples can do. First of all, to recognize times in advance, if they can predict it, that they may be under sleep constrained, at least condition. So if you know, for instance, that you've got some major work project or grant that's due where you're likely to, frankly, not be getting the sleep you need, even if you try, the sleep quality might be poor. to sort of recognize that and anticipate that and plan with your partner to recognize, are there ways that you can sort of share responsibilities to lighten the load while you're, at home, while you're managing these increased work stress and at the same time not getting the good quality sleep you need. So you can anticipate in that way. You also can label what's going on. I talked about this before, of using the term slangry to help you and your partner recognize. And it's not a permanent excuse. Don't try to go to that every time that you behave badly in your relationship. But sort of being able to label it, if you lash out at your partner or you're not your most empathic self because you're undergoing a situation that is causing you to lose sleep, calling it for what it is, that you're just not your best self when you're sleep deprived, that's also a way to sort of give yourself and your partner some distance when you're in a temporary situation, not getting the sleep you need, and your mood and your behavior is suffering. Again, it's not a permanent excuse. You can't go to that every time that you behave badly in a relationship, but sort of having that as a sort of a recognized and identifiable phenomenon with you and your partner. And I think you both acknowledging that it's real. It's hard to behave well when you're sleep deprived. That can give you both a little distance. And it can be good for the partner too, to realize, okay, well, maybe this is not just my partner lashing out at me because she no longer loves me. It's really just that they just don't have the wits about them because they're not getting the sleep they need. Also, again, thinking about timing of having other difficult conversations. If you're going through a time when you're not getting the sleep you need, try to table some of those conversations and have some sort of agreement with your partner that this is not going to be the best time for us to engage in these conversations. Now, you can't say that this is going to last forever because you can't permanently table those conversations, but giving yourself some space and hopefully identifying a time when things will sort of regulate in terms of your sleep, when you're going to sort of be more capable of having difficult conversations. Also, depending on the situation, but for instance, when having young children, rally your support networks around you. So often, when sleep deprived parents, and it's really both mother and father who can suffer from sleep deprivation following the birth of a child, we have people come over and want to meet the baby and want to socialize and be good hosts. But what we should really be doing, if you're somebody who's going to visit a new parent, ask them to go take a nap, right? If you're the guest, use your time and your willingness to be supportive to this family to actually give them what they need most, which is an opportunity to rest. So offer to take the baby off their hands, give them a half an hour at least to go lay down, and tell them that the coffee and socializing, that can wait for another time. But I'm really here to take care of you, and you getting a little bit of catch-up sleep could be really beneficial.
I love the idea of giving ourselves permission, and either giving ourselves permission to say, I'm sorry, I'm just going to have to go grab a nap. It's okay to do that. It's great to do that. Or recognizing that your partner, I think we all know that when our partner is not well slept, if you've been in a relationship long enough and you're sensitive to your partner, you can usually tell when it's not the case. So I love that. And then I also love just that former point before I want to hear the third one. But Brene Brown has this concept that she will often do a check-in with her husband at the end of the day when they come home. And it's sort of like, okay, where are you at in terms of your energy and your reserves right now? And, husband will say, I had a pretty good day. I'm at a 7 out of 10. And Brene could say, well, I just had a really rough day. I'm just at a 3 out of 10. And then the dynamic between you. And then the person who's at a 7 out of 10 says, well, don't worry, I'll make the dinner. I'll take the trash out. Why don't you just go and sit down? I'll bring you over a drink. Just have a sit. And I wonder, where is that version for sleep where you wake up in the morning and you kind of just say, I didn't sleep well. In terms of my sleep health for our relationship, I'm at a 2 today. And someone says, wow, I had a great night of sleep. I'm at an 8. Don't worry. Thanks for letting me know that. I'll tread kindly throughout the rest of the day. I do think that it wouldn't be a bad idea if every now and again, even if it's just that you had a bad night of sleep, that you just don't make the assumption that the other person understands it, voice it, and give it a number if you want to. Say, I'm really in a bad place right now. I'm at a 2 out of 10. I was slept miserably. So I'm sorry for whatever I do
Yeah.
today. I am so sorry, but just know it's not because I don't love you. It's just because I've had a bad night of sleep. But sorry, I interrupted you. You were going to say
Yeah,
something
no,
elegant as a third.
no, it's great and it's actually related. What you're saying sort of extends one of my earlier comments of, so it's basically label what you're feeling, which is,
Yes, yes.
poorly rested, and then share it so that you can together co-regulate and navigate and actually help to rebalance each other. And in fact, one of the most interesting areas of relationship research that I'm diving into somewhat with regard to sleep in couples and how couples really can help to co-regulate each other. And I think the Brene Brown example is really using this sharing of information of sort of where you are in terms of your own emotional barometer, and then allowing your partner in a really healthy way to help lift you up. If you're on the low end, how can your partner compensate that? And that's a beautiful demonstration of one of the pathways through which relationships can be literally health protective in terms of reducing risk for chronic health conditions by helping to sort of balance these emotional states by engaging together and supporting each other when we experience these bumps in the road.
For those who are struggling with sleep, one recommendation that I've mentioned on this podcast before is meditation. To be honest, I was a complete skeptic at first. I just thought it was all a little bit out there. But the data was just so strong for sleep. So I tried it, and that was 7 years ago. And I've now been meditating for 10 minutes before bed every night. The app that I've been using is called Calm, and I decided to partner with them. And Calm have agreed to offer a full 40% off its premium subscription to you, the listener. So if you want to get that 40% off and start your meditation journey, just go to calm.com/Matt Walker. So that is calm, CALM.com/Matt Walker.
The final recommendation I would say, it's kind of related because it's really recognizing that during these times when you're sort of not at your best self, you want to sort of maximize the quality moments you have with your partner because you might not have a lot of quantity good moments. Work on like when, sort of identify that you're not in a great place, but like try to at least share some positive experience with your partner, even when you're under sleep deprived conditions, even when you're not feeling at your best. Try to do at least one shared experience that is pleasurable together, whether it be just sitting and sharing something about your day or doing something fun to sort of balance the emotional drain that you're experiencing and probably some of the withdrawal that you're demonstrating towards your partner if you're in a sleep deprived state, but sort of balancing that out with some positivity. And
I
just
think
the
that's a
final point.
really
Yeah.
important point. Sorry to interject again. I know
Yeah.
that coming back to the legend that is John Gottman, I know they
Yeah.
did that analysis where they were looking at what is the ratio of positive to negative interactions in a couple and how does that predict? And I can't quite remember what that golden ratio was. Maybe it was a 5-to-1 ratio that you've really got to be having somewhere in the region of 4 to 5 positive interactions with your partner for every one negative one in terms of whether or not it has probabilistic or at least predictive power of the success that you will last as a couple or that you don't. And that ratio is perhaps never more at potential threat than when either one or both individuals are underslept. And therefore, recognizing that and making every effort, despite, as you said, the motivation. I'm so tired. I don't even want to make the effort of trying to be nice or come up with something. And I'm just so tired. I'm sorry. It's worth it because you've got to make sure that that ratio is still in your favor as a couple if you want to succeed.
Exactly. You're sort of putting just, at least a little bit in that bank account, even under depleted conditions. It's a great point. And the final thing I would just want to say about this is this all assumes that none of the situations that I've described last forever, including having young children, although I know it feels like that when you're going through it. They do grow up. You do get through the newborn stage and the toddler stage when they're more likely to wake you up in the middle of the night. Work-related stress should, at some point, at least reduce so that you're not always acting in crisis. And if not, if we're talking about a more chronic problem, if there's some other chronic underlying sleep issue that's happening, then we need to really go to the root of the problem rather than these mitigating strategies to deal with a temporary issue, right? So, like, if this becomes a chronic situation where you're sleep deprived or not getting good quality sleep, then these mitigating strategies are really not what you need. You really need to go to the source of the problem and really consider what is in your agency and your control to actually overcome that chronic sleep disruption.
Yeah, that just can't be a sustainable model as individual humans, and really not from a coupled standpoint either. Let me ask a different question. This is one that it's a little left of field, but it's one I sometimes enjoy thinking about myself or enjoy being asked about. What are some common myths about sleep and relationships that perhaps your research or anyone else's work that you can think of has debunked? So, what do you see as the sort of the common myths out there regarding sleep and relationships that, if you look at the data or in truth in my clinical practice, I'm sorry, they're just not true? Anything, it's such an unfair
Yeah.
question, but is there
No,
anything
no, I
out there
love
in
it.
terms of myths?
I love it. I think it's so important in terms of science communication as well, because these myths reflect what many people think. And if we have science to bring to bear to actually demonstrate that they are myths, that is not true, well, then that's important because they're myths because they're widely held non-truths. And there's many of them about couples and sleep. And I think it's partly, again, what's so fascinating because we really haven't had extensive decades of research that has considered the coupled nature of sleep. It's still relatively new in terms of the scientific evidence. So, yeah, some of my favorite ones when I think about couples related sleep myths. Number one, that sleeping apart is necessarily the sign of a loveless or sexless union, right? This goes back to some of our earlier conversation about the stigma attached to sleeping apart. There's really no evidence that couples' sleeping arrangement necessarily dictates the quality of the relationship. And I'm sure we're all well aware of many happy couples who choose to sleep apart. And it's also true that sleeping together doesn't necessarily guarantee a healthy and happy relationship. So there's really no definitive connection between a couple's chosen sleeping arrangement and the quality of their relationship. It's really about the couple. There are many other factors at play, including how they might arrive at the decision to sleep apart if that's what they choose to do. A second major one that again comes up in a couple context is this idea that snoring is just a nuisance or it's just a joke for us to rib our partners about. We know that this is a really dangerous myth, number one, because snoring could be a sign of a significant sleep disorder, that is obstructive sleep apnea. And it's also not just a nuisance or a joke to the partner who is really suffering, not just their sleep, but their quality of life. And that feeling, if, snoring is treated as this haha funny thing, well, the partner who is really suffering can end up feeling very invalidated that I'm dying here because I'm being tortured with sleep deprivation on a nightly basis by my partner. And here we're making light of it at dinner conversations. So that idea that snoring is just a nuisance is an absolute myth, both in terms of the real health consequences and relational consequences for both the individual who snores and also the partner. Another myth that I love is the idea that larks and owls just can't get along, or that birds of a feather must necessarily flock together. There's actually some truth to this myth that when we talk about larks and owls, again, we're talking about circadian preferences or chronotypes. And there is actually some evidence to suggest that larks, that is morning types, are more likely to pair with other larks. And there might be some other personality factors that correlate with morningness, eveningness that lead to the fact that statistically pairs are more likely to be matched in terms of their circadian preference than mismatched. It also might be sort of a behavioral issue of, frankly, if you're an evening owl, you're more likely, frankly, to be out at a bar meeting a potential partner at 2 a.m. than a lark. So the lark is just less likely to be in your presence. That said, there are many, many examples of mismatched pairs. And the myth here is that they necessarily can't get along. Again, there is some evidence that among mismatched pairs, that is a lark with an owl, they do have higher levels of relationship conflict and lower sexual activity. But those findings are entirely moderated, or they depend on the couple's ability to problem solve. That is, there is this correlation between couples who are mismatched in their morningness, eveningness, having more relationship problems, but only if they are not good problem solvers. So if you're in a mismatched pair, if your partner's an owl, but you're a morning lark, and you are good problem solvers, or you work towards becoming better problem solving individuals, then that does not have to have any negative implication for your relationship.
I myself have experienced that, where there was a sort of a circadian mismatch, and just being respectful of that. Now, I have the advantage of being a sleep scientist, so you get to have those conversations, and it's almost like child-proofing a house. You chronotype proof your relationship in the house. So cups had rubber coasters glued onto them on the bottom. So when you placed it on the surface in the kitchen, it wasn't going to make a loud noise at 11 o'clock at night and wake the other person. The microwave, sort of, you do a James Bond on it, you dismantle it, and then I'll snip the wires for the beep that goes off when it's finished warming up your cup of tea. So you can definitely like chronotype proof your house and your existence and get to harmonious equilibrium and still be different chronotypes. But I
Wow, you
also
have the
think,
high-tech versions.
well, let's see. Yeah, I won't go into the success of that relationship yet, nevertheless, but we can, I think, be more open about that chronotype difference. A sponsor of today's show is Inside Tracker, which is a service that comes out to your home, and they will analyze your blood and your DNA to know precisely what is going on inside of you. Hence the name Inside Tracker. They look at your blood, your metabolic signals, your hormonal health metrics, and then they give you a personalized, actionable set of lifestyle changes in response to that readout. And the goal there is to improve your health. I was looking and informed they have some new cardiovascular and new hormonal biomarkers that I'm particularly interested in. One that I'm focused on is something called ApoB, which is an absolutely critical heart health measure. And I get it done now with them somewhere between 4 to 6 times a year. Why? Well, my family unfortunately has a strong history of cardiovascular disease, so I am checking that pretty ruthlessly. And by the way, I do buy the product myself out of pocket. I don't want to fall prey to any of those trappings and undue incentives. Although, with full admission, I still use my own discount code that you can use to get some money off. And that code for you is insidetracker.com/Matt Walker. So just go over to insidetracker.com/Matt Walker. And again, if you want to get that discount, it is insidetracker.com/Matt Walker. Thanks very much. Sometimes I'll hear couples and they'll say, well, I'll just try to go to bed at that time. Or, well, I'll just seem to try to push my time. They try to brute force themselves to it rather than at least having an open conversation about it. And then something you mentioned in our first episode before we get to the final myth, but regarding chronotype, I was stunned. I was speaking to a friend and she was saying very early on when she was dating someone, just straight out came up with a question, just said, so when do you prefer to have sex? Do you like having sex in the morning or in the afternoon or in the evening? What's your preference? And I think the other person was pleasantly surprised by that conversation, but it was such a beautiful, honest representation of sexual activity chronotype preference, which clearly exists, just as you mentioned in the first episode. And I think now we're at the stage of people talking more about sleep in general. and therefore feeling it's okay to ask those questions. Because I'll guarantee you, everyone has probably thought themselves about that question. They probably just haven't had the courage to enunciate it to their emerging new partner or their longtime partner. They've never had that conversation. So I love that you're just raising awareness of that.
Yeah. Well, and I think that extends, by the way, to things like dating apps. Not that I'm particularly familiar with them at this time. I've been married for 20 years, but to my knowledge, the last I checked, dating apps don't even deeply investigate things like chronotype and basic questions of when do you like to have sex and when is your preferred bedtime. These are things that really matter. Again, they don't have to dictate where you go in the relationship, but it's really useful information to know certain issues that you might have to overcome in your relationship. And by the way, as you also mentioned, the typical situation that often occurs among mismatched pairs where one is an extreme night owl or even not so extreme, but a night owl and the other is more of a lark. It's often the case where one partner will just try to go along with the other partner's
Right.
schedule as if
Yeah.
because I'm a good partner, I'm going to override my biology. Well, I'm here to
Yeah.
tell you that
It's
that
chronotype
doesn't work.
self-flagellation in some
It
ways.
is.
And it doesn't
And
work.
it
It's
doesn't work.
resentment. Yeah.
Yeah, resentment, insomnia can happen. And again, I've treated many of these couples where they come in, or an individual come in who is coming in for treatment for insomnia, and we'll start talking about when their bedtime is, why their bedtime is their bedtime. And it's like, well, because my partner goes to bed then. And I'll ask, well, are you sleepy at that time? And they'll sort of look at me puzzled and say, no, but my partner's going to bed. And, so we go to bed together. I said, well, sleepiness is what tells your body and your brain that you're ready to go to sleep, not your partner or the clock. And so it's actually often the case that sort of this mismatch in trying to just follow the partner for the sake of wanting to be together, which I get is very important, but you're trying to override biology, which, you're going to fail in that endeavor. And instead, what I recommend couples do is, again, for a mismatched pair where one wants to go to bed at 10 p.m. and the other is really not naturally going to be sleepy until midnight, well, you can share some quality time together in bed before the early bird goes to bed. And then the owl can do the lower tech versions than some of the things that you described, which is sort of quietly getting out of bed, going to another room, engaging in some other activity because they're kind of often awake and functional, some of their best functioning at that time, and then quietly return to bed at their more natural bedtime. So it's a way to continue to share a bed and have that really important ritual and quality time together before falling asleep, but to not try to override their biology. And by the same token, the morning owl can quietly wake up in the morning, get out of bed, and maybe bring their night owl partner a cup of coffee or tea a few hours later when it's their more natural awakening. So there are strategies that healthy couples can and do engage in to overcome this sort of mismatch in circadian preference. But it's important to know where you both stand. So yeah, so the final myth that I think is a really good one, and there's some really interesting research that was done on this, and I'll forget the title, but it's related to this and it's a great title. But the myth is that we've all heard the saying, don't go to bed angry. Well, this research attempted to unpack that and really identify, is it bad? Should we always resolve our anger before going to bed with our partner? And what they found from this research was the saying should really not be, don't go to bed angry, because sometimes we don't have control of that. Sometimes we will have anger. We will be feeling what we're feeling. And to suppress that or try to resolve it means you'll probably just not go to sleep. But what the findings showed was that what was really detrimental for sleep was having a conflict right before bed. So while it wasn't the end of the world or the end of their sleep for couples to go to bed feeling some anger, what did hurt their sleep is going to bed right after engaging in conflict. So this
Mm.
again gets back to timing of those difficult discussions in relationships. And generally, it's not a good idea to do it right before bedtime, both because you're already sleepy and tired from that day, which means your emotional reserves are already depleted. But furthermore, it could also negatively impact your sleep that night as well. So you can really have this vicious cycle.
I love the concept of when you should fold your cards and just say, you know what, I don't think we should get into this at this moment in time because there is that myth. And then so you push on through. Now look at the clock. It's now 12:30. You started this conflict at 11. You're still both going into it. And you are just at that point from your prefrontal cortex, you're not going into a particularly regulated territory
You're
of your
turning into a
brain's
toddler
capacity.
trying
Yeah,
to deal
exactly.
with major relationship issues. It just does not make sense. The better
Um,
strategy might be, okay, acknowledge that you're angry, do some sort of self regulation, maybe some breathing strategies, just sort of cool your anger so that you can get sleepy and you can go to bed, but not to feel like you have to push through and have the conflict in order to resolve the anger, because that's really unlikely to happen. And you're going to have further consequences for that night of sleep. And it can have this, again, cyclical effect on the relationship.
so changing the narrative a little bit, I am a total techno nerd, despite being essentially an analog man in a digital world in terms of my desperately inept capacity with technology. I do love it. And of course, love the idea of sleep technology. Yes, the invasion of technology into the bedroom has caused some sleep problems, but I also think
Mhm.
it's providing some interesting solutions. But is there, and I thought, well, if I've got Wendy on a call, I have to ask her this question. What role does technology play in the sleep and relationship issues that we've been discussing and that you've been researching? Do you have thoughts on that? Working with companies on that? Is there any interesting stuff in the techno nerd technology space when it comes to sleep and relationships?
Yeah, I mean, as we know, this area is blowing up. It's huge.
Mhm.
It's really exciting. And so let me first start with the potential positives before going to the negatives of technology in the bedroom, because I think some of that is a bit obvious. But when it comes to couples, I think we don't think about it enough. But let me start with the positive here. Yeah, I mean, the technology surrounding, and this is, I'm going to use technology broadly in this case. So, yes, we have sort of our apps and our trackers and all these things, but there's also just improvements in bedding and the sleep environment that are allowing for couples to have a shared sleep experience, but also make that experience individualized. So things like mattresses that have individual preferences for firmness or temperature regulation, all of these things are allowing many couples who might otherwise feel incompatible with sharing a bed to actually share a bed because they can individualize their actual experiences. So I think that this is, super cool. And there's definitely sort of ways to also use technology to mitigate and help couples who are mismatched pairs problem solve some of those issues with regard to sort of managing light and things like that, which are going to be different for a lark and an owl. On the downside, and again, this might be more obvious, but of course, we know the technology is here, it's here to stay, everybody's using it. And I will say that I am still someone who personally does not bring my phone into the bedroom. I know I'm like the last person on earth to do this. My own husband does bring his phone to the bedroom. So I haven't won that battle. But I will say this, even if you're going to continue what you're doing, which I suspect most people are, which is to have their phones in their bedroom, that is your choice. Let's think about how much we've changed as a species in terms of what the night and the morning means, in terms of the first and the last thing you do and you see and maybe you touch before closing the day with sleep and waking up in the day. It used to be that this was a time for social connection and a really important time for couples where you might actually look at your partner, where you might touch your partner, where you might hold their hand, where you might engage in a conversation with them. And in the morning, you might say, "Good morning," and look at this face that you love as the first thing that wakes you up and rises you in the morning. And instead, what we're doing now, and we're often replacing with that really critical and valuable moment for you and your partner, both for fulfilling your own emotional needs and building your relational bond together. Instead, many people are substituting that with scrolling at an inanimate object, which is their phone or their tablet. And just take a moment and think about what we're sacrificing when we do that. There is another human lying potentially next to you, inches away, that you are deprioritizing for the sake of this phone. And I realize that that might not be the intention, but an alien who came down and looked at us and looked at these behaviors might assume that the phone is more important than the human lying next to you, if that's the last thing that you look at or touch in the evening and the first thing that you look at or touch in the morning. So that's my warning sign about technology use in the bedroom as it affects couples.
A supporter of today's podcast is a comprehensive nutritional drink that I'm sure you've heard of, and one that I've genuinely been using for almost, 4 years to date, and I continue to use it. That is AG1. AG1, if you don't know, it's a nutritional supplement, and for me, I put it in my shakes that I make, my post-workout shakes, and it contains over 75 different minerals, vitamins, probiotic, prebiotics, you name it, and you consume it every day. By the way, for the record, I do buy my own. I hope that that's a testament, the fact that I'm using it, but also I just don't want to fall into any of the trappings of free product. It's perhaps good to also know that they are registered and approved by the Therapeutic Goods Administration. They also have GMP, or Good Manufacturing Practice badges and stamps. They are rigorous. So if you want to reshuffle the things that you're taking, such as multivitamins, etc., you can start by trying AG1. And you can try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of both vitamin D and K2. And for listeners of this podcast, you can also get, in addition to those things, 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first subscription. So go over to drinkag1.com/Matt Walker. That is drinkag1, all one word, drinkag1.com/Matt Walker, and you can check out there. Do you offer usually any guide rails, just to say, when you're sort of speaking with couples and all of the work that you do with couples? And by the way, folks, I know we've been speaking about Wendy as a researcher and empirical findings, but she's also one of the most sought after sleep clinicians in the world. She's so skilled and worked with hundreds of couples. In those conversations, do you ever bring up the thorny topic of technology use in the bedroom, and is anyone holding resentment? And do you offer any guide rails as to maybe how a couple either has that conversation or directly say, this could be something that you should do, or do you just stay away from that and it's just there are other things that you typically focus on?
Generally, they bring it to me if it's an issue.
Yeah.
So I don't really have to probe too deeply. Generally, one partner might be perfectly satisfied with the situation, and the other is definitely unsatisfied with the situation. And it often is a situation where one partner is suffering from, let's say, insomnia, and is really trying to optimize, and follow the rules for better sleep, and still they're not sleeping well. And she or he is lying next to a partner who is scrolling through their phone, following all sorts of other unhealthy sleep behaviors, and still sleeping through the night. And again, there can be resentment there, just as you watch your partner who's like doing all the things that he shouldn't be doing or she shouldn't be doing, but still sleeping soundly, and you're there suffering. And so I often see this, and it's often, couples will come to me about how do we get both of our needs met? Because the partner who's there, using their phone in bed, who's sleeping soundly, doesn't see it as a problem. But the person who's having sleep problems wants to sort of line everything up, including their partner's sleep behaviors that affects them, to try to optimize their sleep. The first thing that I'll do is really have the couple engage in a conversation about, from their perspective, really trying to communicate using those I statements, how this is affecting me as an individual. It's not about, you need to stop using your phone in bed because it's insensitive and rude and you're keeping me awake at night, but really turning back and saying, I'm really trying to improve my sleep because it's been poor for a long time, and I'm doing everything I can to get my sleep better, because I know it's not only good for my health, but it's good for us as a couple. And when you're lying in bed with your phone, it's really distracting for me. The light is affecting me. Would you be willing to experiment with not having your phone in bed? And that's really the strategy. In addition to opening up the conversation, I'll encourage couples to try things as, let's try this one out, right? Let's give a trial of, could you hear your partner's concern, and would you be willing to adjust your behavior? Instead of using your phone up until the minute when the lights go off, would you be willing to give yourselves a 15-minute buffer where you listen to your partner's concerns, and at the very least you put the phone down 15 minutes before going to bed? Or would you even be willing to back that up even further once you experience that sort of trial? So for many things with behavior change, with couples as well as with individuals, it's about thinking less about this as like this all or nothing change or this really permanent change, but would you be willing to experiment with this to see what sort of, what are you giving up by doing this? And what is it potentially giving me? And what might we potentially gain as a couple from experimenting with this new behavioral strategy?
Genius. I love that. And it is almost an invitation to get curious. And I've learned my lesson through all sorts of failed and desperately inopportune ways of trying to have those conversations. But instead, again, keep it on the I. I'm not speaking about you, but this is the I. And then also, I have occasionally tried to use the we approach too, to say, instead of saying, would you be open to maybe putting down the phone and less, but instead saying, well, what do you think about us doing the experiment together? Should we try to put our phones away in the last 10 minutes before bed and maybe just see if we can meet each other and be present for each other? Or does that not feel like something that you would be excited about? And just sort of saying it's a like we're both in this together because we're
Yes.
both part of the same team. It's not about point scoring, that I want you to do this, so I've just won this argument and I'm going to put a point on our board. That's adversarial. That's not cooperative. And ultimately, it's about the two of you and the success of your relationship. So I do like this idea of being gentle with the soft start, not doing accusatory statements with the you do this version, and then just inviting this change that you're seeking as an exploration through
Mhm.
curiosity by way of an experiment that is non-permanent. Because when you do all of those things, you remove all of the threat and you remove all of the accusation from the equation of that conversation. And it's, at least when I was reading your book and including some of the case studies where you describe some cases, it really taught me a great deal about the more optimal ways of having these conversations and approaching it and the sensitivities that we should have around it. So I love that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I,
Yeah.
I was going to just round out maybe with a final question. And it's one that I sometimes bristle at when people finish an interview and they say, okay, so what are the top X number of things for better sleep? And of course, you can never summarize it like that. And you sort of think, well, I know what you're trying to do, but I've just written an entire book trying to do this. And so if you sum up the amount of ink that you've had to use in your book, sharing the covers, to describe the complexities of those things, and then someone says, so we've got the last 45 seconds before the news. What are your top three tips? What are your three single most important pieces of advice you would give to a couple trying to improve their sleep and therefore their relationship? But I'm still going to do it to you, Wendy. What would you say, maybe rank ordered or just three? What amongst all of this are the three, four, five, whatever you wish for, things that a couple could start focusing on in the next week to try to help things?
It is a difficult question, but we do get it quite a bit. I guess where I would begin is actually using some of your words, as you just commented about, be curious and explore. I think this is a real opportunity, and it's one of the reasons I wrote my book, because the coupled nature of sleep is such a neglected topic. We just don't even have it as part of our dialogue, except of late when we're talking about things like sleep divorce, a word I hate, or, all these
Yeah.
sort of sensational ideas. We don't really have a great way of dialoguing as a natural part of the conversation about what it means to be coupled, day and night. We talk about in marriage vows, there's these dichotomies between, we're married, we're together in sickness and health, for richer, for poorer. But marriage or partnership, long-term partnership, also encompasses the dichotomy of day and night. And we often forget that night. So let's start by being curious in our relationships and willing to explore with our partners our beliefs and our expectations about sleep, our chronotypes. Use this as an opportunity as you're getting to know your partner in the initial stage of the relationship, or if you're in a long-term relationship, there's still time to delve into some of these questions about not just, what is your ideal timing of sleep, but what was your strangest sleep experience, or what makes you feel most safe and secure at night? Allowing these really curiosity-driven conversations to evolve with your partner, to normalize this discussion of what the night means to us as a couple, and to identify potential discrepancies or just differences of opinions where both can be right. They're just based on different experiences. Maybe your partner grew up with 5 siblings, sharing a bed with 3 of them, or sharing a bedroom with 3 of them, and you were a single child. All of these things can shape how we feel and how we experience our sleep. And it's just a great opportunity to learn and explore with your partners where your ideas and expectations and beliefs about sleep came from, and how do you navigate that together. And by having that approach of curiosity, that can really prepare you well for being ready to be good communicators when and if challenges do arise around sleep in your relationship. And it is pretty much the norm at some point in your relationship where there may be some challenges, whether it be the birth of a child or during certain life transitions. When women undergo menopause, there are significant sleep disruptions that can also have an impact on the partner. There's the increase in sleep disorders and other health conditions that happen as we age. All of these are both opportunities and challenges where couples learning to use good communication skills to know how to open the topic to deal with the issues that arise when it comes to your coupled sleep. So again, using those I statements, timing the conversation well. And as you mentioned, really focusing this conversation and having at the crux of it that this is a we problem. And we're going to look for we solutions, that is our solutions, and really focusing on how talking about and trying to improve your sleep together is really a strategy towards relationship enhancement. And that's where you both benefit. So it's really an approach that encompasses the we of the coupled sleep. And in fact, we actually have a new sleep treatment for couples dealing with sleep apnea that plays on that term. And the typical treatment for sleep apnea is CPAP, or continuous positive airway pressure. But to really emphasize that we experience, our intervention is called the WEPAP treatment that we're currently testing. But the final point that I want to give as a tip is, if you haven't learned from your wonderful work, Matt, and others, that we all need to do a better job of prioritizing sleep. My message really here is prioritizing sleep is not just about the individual benefits. It's really about the benefits to our social world, and in this case, the most intimate of our social connections, our partners. And by prioritizing sleep, we're not only benefiting our own individual health and well-being, but we're really making great strides to support and sustain that most central of relationships.
Wendy, you're amazing. You're brilliant. Is there any stone that we have not unturned major that you would like to mention? And if not, could you please remind folks, where can they find out more about you, about your work? Where can they find your book? Where can they consume the talks and the content that you've done online? Help me.
You've been incredibly comprehensive, and I certainly don't want to put people to sleep, so I'll leave it there. And if there's anything we missed, again, you can always go to my book where I cover lots and lots of topics related to couples and sleep throughout the life transition. It's been an absolute pleasure to get to talk with you, Matt, and discuss these ideas that I'm so passionate about. My website is wendytroxel.com. I'm findable on Twitter or X at Wendy Troxel. My Instagram handle is sharing the covers, tag of my book. I also have a number of TEDx talks out there that you can look up.
They're so good.
And
They really
my
are
book
so
is
good.
available. Thank you. And my book is available at all major online retailers. Thanks so much for this time.
Wendy, thank you. Everyone listening, please at least go explore the chance to buy the book, Sharing the Covers, Every Couple's Guide to Better Sleep. It's a great read. Wendy is not just an elegant communicator. Watch those TED Talks, they're brilliant, but also just a wonderful writer. You never have to feel as though you're rereading a page because it was filled with word salad and highfalutin gobbledygook. It's a great, great read. Wendy, for all that you do for the field, for sharing your time here, as well as all of your insights in terms of sharing under the covers. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Matt. The feeling is mutual.